Are you ready to make the most of your oil and gas mineral rights? Welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. Get the knowledge and resources you need to manage your minerals and royalties. Here is your host, Matt Sands.
This episode was recorded live at the National Association of Royalty Owners, or NARO, National Convention in Oklahoma City in early October of 2025. Justin and I had the privilege of speaking in front of a live audience at the convention, and our presentation was a little bit unplanned as we had a speaker that couldn't attend due to a family emergency, and so we had to pinch hit in a very quick time frame. And so the audio quality of this recording isn't quite up to where I'd like it to be, but there is amazing questions that were asked in this live Q&A episode. So please stick through the audio quality. I think you'll get a lot of value out of the episode. So without further ado, here is our live listener questions episode from the NARO National Convention in Oklahoma City.
Hello and welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sands, and I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Williams, and we're here to help you make the most of your minerals and royalties. And today we're going to answer your questions live. We're here at the National Association of Royalty Owners Convention, and we have the pleasure of doing a live Q&A episode. So we're really looking forward to your questions. Try to stump us, give us your hardest and most pressing questions. And so we'll go ahead and get started.
Well, good morning, Matt and Justin. It's nice to have you here. It's nice to see you in person as opposed to just on YouTube. So I do have a question for you. My family and I have a number of small oil production wells, and during COVID, a lot of these shut down because it simply wasn't viable for the operators to continue to run them. On a couple of these, we've had 3 changes in operators over the past 6 years. And since we're not getting any royalties, we know there's a pump jack out there, pump that's operating. We've tried to contact the operator, and we're really not getting any response. What are some of the things that we could do? Potentially contact a landowner? Should we be contacting the Oklahoma Commission? I think we're just looking for some advice here. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're on the right track. So a lot of the information can be found online. The first thing would be establishing if there's production. Is it currently active? And, working with an oil and gas attorney, you could certainly contact the commission. And Matt, if you want to kind of sum up some more.
Yeah, I would say doing what you're suggesting and contacting the Oklahoma Corporation Commission. The other thing is, in statute, there are certain protections that mineral and royalty owners have in different states. Oklahoma is pretty good in terms of, what they will require of operators if you give them notice. Sometimes giving them notice via certified mail is required to start the clock ticking for any sort of a particular response regarding, non-payment and things like that. So that would be if they had been producing, but maybe they were latent or had not paid you royalties. If the well has been shut in because it's uneconomic, I would try to reach out to the operator. I have a situation, I have some minerals in eastern Colorado where it's an older conventional well, a vertical well that can stop producing. And I reached out to the operator and had a conversation with them just because, you can actually get a hold of the owner because it goes directly to like his phone or whatever. And some of those small operators, you can find out, hey, what's the issue with this well? Why isn't it producing? They may have, a rod that's parted or some mechanical issue or something that needs to get fixed, and they're just waiting to go and do it, or maybe it's not economic unless oil goes above a certain price. Also, make sure you get a copy of your oil and gas lease and look at the terms and the language in the lease, and your attorney can help you interpret that and understand, what you need to do there as far as if you have certain requirements for shut-in royalties to be paid, or maybe it's for a limited time, or maybe if they're not following the lease, you can get it released and force their hand. Of course, if you are in that situation, there's pros and cons, because if you get that well plugged and it never produces again, then you're not going to receive royalties. But on the other hand, you're protecting your rights, and maybe there's the opportunity to lease those minerals again in the future. So that would be where I would start, I think, is just trying to contact the operator, working with your attorney, understanding your lease, and then just, seeing what your options are and making sure you're doing everything possible. And sometimes it does fall into that orphan well category. If it is a small operator that's maybe marginally profitable or whatever, and they decide to just close up shop and move away, then you're stuck, with sort of the result of that. But, hopefully you can get some action. Thanks for the question. That's a friend of the show, Barb Rankin. She's on the show as well. Great NARO volunteer as well. So thank you, Barb.
Yeah, thank you. All right, another question?
I want to say thank you to the lady asked the question because this is a follow-up. We have the same issue. We contacted the operators. They are pulling the tubing. They have removed equipment. We've talked to the Corporation Commission Field Service. They're not producing. They haven't produced in over 2 years. So we're looking at plug and produce. We're talking. They tell us about held by production. So you're talking. We're in McLean County. We have several old vertical wells, one horizontal, and we're trying to find a lease. We're going to go to the courthouse in McLean County to find that lease to see what. But we have several different operators with 2 or 3 particular wells. They have abandoned, pulled the equipment, pulled the tubing, and they're not plugging, they're not turning it loose. So we can potentially find someone else to produce in that zone or go down to lower zones. We are at a loss. What do we do?
Yeah, that's a really interesting situation. And Matt, would that be a situation where you would, go into the open market and talk with operators that might be interested in going to that area? I know for them, it's going to be return on investment. Is it worth it?
Yeah, it's sort of a tricky situation because you're looking to, you would need to get that lease released, get rid of that old lease because no one's going to come in and do anything if they don't own the lease and don't have the right to do what's granted or conveyed under the rights of that lease. So, if there's potential there are companies that do go around. It's a very niche market, I would say, for those companies that are looking to go in and recomplete a well, existing zone, or go to the uphole recompletion or something like that would be what you're talking about, where they're going to look to produce more oil from the existing or a new formation and spend a little bit of money because they believe they can get a return on their investment, like Justin said. For those vertical wells, for the horizontal well, that's a little trickier situation. You can't really do that because it's producing from one zone and it's presumably then already completed. So there are things like refracs and things like that are coming up that could be an opportunity. I think your best situation, if you can work through with that operator and get some movement at least on the horizontal. I think the vertical wells, so that's the thing with horizontal well development. A lot of times those vertical wells get plugged and abandoned because they're at the end of life. Maybe it's not economic to produce anymore, or maybe more than anything is there's a chance that there's going to be well interference between those vertical wells and the horizontal. So if you have just another slightly similar situation to what you're talking about, is if you had some vertical wells and they're talking about drilling a horizontal well, it's actually better for them to go in and plug and abandon those vertical wells. That allows them to go and drill the new horizontal well and make sure that it's not going to cause an issue with the wellbore integrity of those old vertical wells and things like that. But just in terms of protecting your rights, it's kind of the same advice, I guess, with Barb's question would be to make sure you're protecting your rights under the lease. I would highly recommend either yourself going to McLean County Courthouse and getting a copy of that lease, or hiring a landman to do that so you can understand what your rights are, because that'll really dictate what your next steps are, what your rights are, and what the operator can or can't do under the terms of that lease. And then, hopefully you can release it again. You're in an area that thankfully there's some development, and if you can see if there's other operators that are maybe interested in taking a lease and fully developing, if there's been some increased density orders and more additional wells getting drilled in other sections and you have the room for other wells to get drilled, that would be the thing to go and try to get out of your current lease, get them to plug and abandon the well, and then go and release it to another operator to drill the rest of the section out.
So if you say to the operator, if they had used to 2 years, and yes, we require the plugging and abandon and to release that term to the releases, how can you force that on them? You can tell them all day long, but that doesn't mean they're going to do it.
Yeah, again, I think getting a copy of that lease and getting with your attorney to understand your options are really the next steps there, because that'll dictate if the language of the lease says that they had to have continuous production or produce in paying quantities and things like that. They'll dictate if they're not meeting that, then they're you could request that they do that. But it really just depends on the lease, and it's very case and fact specific. So getting the lease and getting with your attorney and then going from there.
Hi, kind of curious in Texas, some of the allocation stuff in regards to specific place where the discrepancy of the net revenue interest calculation between using an allocation method versus a pool unit acreage destination. If an operator has filed all the permits as a pool unit, but calculated under TGO using allocation, which has reduced your NRI by 2/3 due to the drilling unit, what are your options there?
I've heard of that happening in the past and going after the operator and forcing them to honor the pooling. So I think that would be if it's more beneficial to you, try to pursue that option. Again, getting a good oil and gas attorney to help navigate that. With the Railroad Commission, they have, since they've approved that and it's been, they formed a pooled unit, they can't go back. They shouldn't be able to, not to say that hasn't happened, but I've seen it where they have forced the operator to recalculate based on the pooling that they've gotten. So it just depends on the specifics of the case and where it's at currently. But if that is where it's still at, I would get with your attorney, and whether it's drafting a letter or going, looking at the Railroad Commission and
So I've done those steps.
Okay.
Problem is they're saying that pooling is a contractual agreement that they never filed. But they do it on the permits and their W-2 that is a pooling unit, they're just saying it's the same.
Okay, I gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, so do you have an attorney that you're working with that has been helping you with it?
We're going back and forth. It's kind of decision now whether it's worth, is the well producing enough to make it worth going after litigation.
Yeah, that'd be the last resort, I guess, would be to litigate it. But I'd say that's your attorney can advise on the different options there. But I have seen it where they have held them accountable to that pooling, if that is the route that they've gotten to get it approved. And then when they get you the division order, it was an allocation well, and you're like, well, hold on a second, that doesn't match the permit, and they have to follow what the Railroad Commission is approved from that. But that gets into very specific legal stuff that's out of my area of expertise. But I would say your attorney can definitely advise you on the best course of action. Yeah.
So we had this interesting situation happen. I was working with a young operator who wanted to lease old site from us, had 3 wells on it, and I was working with him, waiting for him to get his financing together before we actually the lease. In the meantime, comes to me, finally has the money. I said, let's do it. He blows out. The Corporation Commission has to fund the well. Now, the in-notes are 100% over the surface and the notes. No notification, no nothing. And I know people are having a problem getting the Corporation Commission to fund wells. So my question on the statement is there any responsibility by the Oklahoma Corporation Commission to notify you of these situations? We have so many open holes all over the school. And they come in on the one that I'm working on to get into production, and they flood. I think it's very unusual, and I don't know what your question is, but have you ever seen that kind of situation where how do we protect ourselves where we'd like to get some additional production coming in, and the Corporation Commission comes in, doesn't even notify us, and floods the well, conduct extension.
Yeah, so that's an interesting situation where the Corporation Commission, through probably some of the funding with the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of states got money to plug wells. And so I just want to make sure I understand correctly. So you're saying the Oklahoma Corporation Commission had somebody go in and plug the well because it was in their books as an orphan well, but then the lessee that you had been talking with had actually planned to go in and recomplete and start to produce from that particular wellbore? Yeah. Well, that's a tricky one. I don't know.
Where's Martha?
Yeah, where's Rick Windblad's here? He's a great Oklahoma attorney, so I highly recommend talking to him. See what your options are. There's certain rights that are conveyed, again with that lease, and if that would be the question: is did they do something, trespass from that standpoint? And did you convey the lease to the new operator when you did that?
We haven't get to the lease yet. We're still at this point.
Okay.
And so we didn't. I didn't want to do the lease with them until they had their money together, so that they had that whole amount of time. They're young guys, just trying to pull it together. It's like, great, this would be a really good opportunity for them and for us. But what I found unique about it is there are so many wells all over the state that need to be plugged. Why that? You know what I mean? I don't know if there's when you have other orphan wells that I'm, hey, how do I know? And I gotta get somebody to come in and look at them. But it's the corporation. They're not responsible to tell you that they're, how do you get that information? I don't like the website, just the website. And how do you know that they're going down? The next one.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a list that you can see from the Oklahoma Corporation Commission what wells they're planning to plug. Some states like Colorado have criteria as far as the prioritization for orphan wells and when they're going to go in and plug them. And so, maybe it's getting a copy of that list or talking, give them a call, to find out more about, that whole situation. And I don't know if,
There is a list, and it is specific criteria they use to build this list based on just wellbore integrity, what's going on nearby, if they need amount of funds, things of that nature. My number one advice is when in doubt, put in an open record request on that well and find out what got on that list and what steps they went through. I know that you said you hate the website. I do too, but there should be right at the top on the right, there's a button you can use, click, it says submit an open record request. Start that process, give them the wellbore name, legal description, API can have it, whatever you can, and get them to basically purge their files and tell you want they chose that well at that time. Sorry.
No, thank you. That's wonderful.
That's that expert advice there. So that was board member Kimberly Wirtz, and also Oklahoma attorney, so very much more qualified to answer that question. I think that's great advice, so thank you.
Something to mention that kind of is the topic of all of these questions so far. As a mineral owner, when we're looking at legal action, it's really a business decision. Is there a return on investment of taking these actions with the attorney? And as Kimberly can testify, attorneys don't like to work for free. That's not very often what they can do to feed their families, and it's something where maybe we want to hold them accountable from a moral standpoint. But this is a business decision, and we have to look and see: can we recover? Is it going to be worth it to work with this attorney? And are we willing to take that risk if it doesn't work out?
My question is two-part. One is I have a royalty and well that not been producing for 4 or 5 years, and they're the club and at least the state lost the league. But I don't want to take over the well, right? I want the plug abandonment liability, but I'm not responsible for the plug abandonment when they do the lease. And that's question one. The question two is there a way to word the lease? Are you aware of any example of wording the lease to? This is unanticipated when I get the lease, but you know, any example of wording the lease to protect me against they're walking away from the well.
And you might have mentioned where is this property located, just so that we can. Oklahoma. Okay. Sure. Yeah, I don't need to put them out.
Maybe I should.
You might protect some other folks, that's for sure. So this would come down to lease, and Kimberly, you really, this might be another question where you could really step in here, but it's going to come down to lease terms, right? There should be something in there when you have working interests is where there might really be danger of the plug and abandonment cost. Is that the case otherwise?
I think the number one thing I would consider is the idea one plugging and abandonment liability should not fall on you. It should fall on the operator who developed the well. That is just implied in the operator's duties when to take it on and assets. Rarely would you see plugging light. Now, that being said, when we talk about orphan wells, when they can't find someone to put on the hook, it's a little bit of a gray area. But the squishy area of the law, especially depending on the state you're in. I know in Texas they want the landowner to come in and foot the bill for the plugging and abandonment. But if you're on an orphan well list, you can rely on the state to possibly fix that well for you and plug and abandon it. I would think talk to an attorney, see what you can do, get the lease fully terminated, and then talk to the agency about remediation.
If I terminate the lease, there's no liability on my part. That's what I'm concerned. The well's coming back to me.
No, the liability of the well will stay with the operator so long as that operator's in existence.
And if they go out of business?
Then it becomes a little bit of a gray area, and who's going to pick up the bill.
So I need to work the lease.
And number one, stay diligent, don't turn your backs and run on you. If you're ready to terminate, you want to plug and abandon, don't sit on your rights, exercise them.
But going forward, having a new lease, I need to include some type of, if they have a deposit or something, they build up some way to plug and abandon that well.
That actually is a requirement of the state. They require every operator to file a organizational type of statement. I'm an operator in this state and to fill wells. With that also comes a surety bond that they have to put up per well. Sometimes those are super bonds, sometimes they're a well bond. It varies. So the operator is required to put money with the state agency for the idea that if they have to walk away, money is there on hold to clean up and remediate a well bore. Now, depending on when that well is drilled and what kind of well it is will depend on the amount of money. What we find very often is that the bonds fall short. They are not enough. And so, yes, you could consider an additional agreement within your lease or a different provision that would add additional bond and additional surety, but the state agency themselves will require that for DOTA to occur.
That's good. That's a good question. A good answer there. And yeah, again, I think seeing if you can get the state, I think back to Kimberly's previous answer, if you can get the state to prioritize that, if it meets the criteria, you could, your intervention could help pump it up on the list and get it plugged sooner. So.
So the surety that the operator is on, and let's say the operator goes bankrupt, how is that surety amount handled in a bankruptcy? Is it still sitting there so that a future operator can go in and have that money available to then plug the well?
Yeah, it would be with the state. So the state would then, deploy that to have somebody plug it, to get it done. So the bonding requirements vary by state. Like Kimberly said, some states are re-looking at that because of this orphan well issue. Like Colorado is an example where they really increased pretty significantly to cover the actual cost if the well does need to get plugged and abandoned, if the operator goes out of business. There are several companies that they've been going after to try to make sure that those wells aren't left in orphan well status. So that is a big issue in the industry, and there's pros and cons to it because the increased bonding requirements may make it hard for those smaller operators to stay in business because they have to put up so much money. But on the other hand, if you're a surface owner and you want to make sure that well doesn't get left and become an issue for you, then it is, I guess, positive that there is money there that can get used towards plugging those well bores.
I think we're running short around. It seems like the right room for this conversation. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Since we waited off the compliant covenants and this sort of thing, I had a question about frac bashing. I signed a division order on a piece of property and months go by and no revenue. So I just reached out and said, hey, we signed a division order with you back several months ago. What gives? And that particular well had been frac bashed by an adjacent well. We're working diligently to get it back online. He sounded like an honest broker. I mean, I called and spoke to the man. But I asked somebody else the same question earlier in the week, and they said that they have the obligation to try and get that back online. I just want to make sure I'm not getting myself into a situation like this question that was raised right over here, where I come out and plug it, and it has that potential.
Yeah, that's a great question. What he's referring to, that frac bashing or frac interference, is when you have an existing well bore that is near a new well that is just being hydraulically fractured. Sometimes there's interference or communication between those well bores. Most of the time, operators, if they're in adjacent units and there is going to be some potential communication on the edge, they will notify all the operators in the area, hey, we're going to complete these wells on this date, and then it's the responsibility of the other offset operator to take steps to protect that well bore. And that may mean shutting in the well to allow pressure to build up so that it doesn't become an issue. So it sounds like maybe they didn't do that. So it's a question, if you get to the bottom of it, it becomes, again, like understanding of if they're going to try to do their best, they're following the prudent operator standard, the implied covenant, like Kimberly mentioned, then, you kind of give them the chance to do it. If there is something that they didn't do that they should have done, and you find that out, then maybe there's a case to be had. But again, it's not, I'm sure they didn't do it intentionally. It's not something that's benefiting them, right? It's hurting them because they're not able to produce that well. So you have to make the decision on, what your options are. Do you, and obviously you're trying to work with the operator and get them to put it back on production. There could be things that they need to do to work over that well to get it back and flowing. And hopefully that's the case, but there are situations that happen in the oil field where, well gets damaged, the formation gets damaged, something happens that is unintended, that is maybe wasn't preventable. Maybe they didn't get notified by the offsite operator, they couldn't have done anything differently. It just is what it is, and they may have to plug and abandon that wellbore, but if they're planning on fully developing that, hopefully it doesn't leave a gap in that development of that unit. Maybe they'll go back in and if it's economic, they'll drill another well to produce those reserves. It all depends on economics at the end of the day, whether they're going to, it's economic to go in there and try to do what they need to do to get it back on production, which I would think it would if it's a brand new well like that. But yeah, that's a tough situation for sure.
Hey, thank you. So I have a broad question, I guess. I'm fourth generation mineral owner in Basin, and definitely it's part of my family legacy. And as I'm getting older, I'm realizing the kids are, this is going to be passed down. Kids, and they're growing up in a generation where they're just more confronted than I have been with kind of the realities of the environment impacts of this industry. And I'm struggling talking to them about kind of our role, our family's kind of placing in the industry. And, the orphan well problem in West Texas is one, example of that, but there's the, leaking abandoned wells, what to do with refused water, waste pits, we're just kind of confronted by that every day. And I'm just wondering, if you have kind of broad advice for, I guess I'm becoming more dissatisfied that the industry's not doing everything that they can, and at least the Texas Railroad Commission is not doing everything that they can. We're trying to be responsible stewards of this resource. Are there things that we can be doing, again, besides at the individual use level, or again, there's some positive things like the bond limit, changes that's possible. Just any other advice on how we can be, conscious of that and more responsible stewards.
There's some really amazing organizations, which has the Well Done Foundation, have they spoken yet, convention? Or we're okay. So the speaker...
We are the Well Done Foundation.
We are the Well Done Foundation, okay. So the Well Done Foundation is an organization that they're a nonprofit that's going out and plugging and abandoning wells. And they have a really good mission. And I think supporting those folks who really want to make a change, that's a hard thing to put together, and to get the funding for that, to be able to continue to do that. As mineral owners, we can certainly support those folks who are taking that initiative and running it forward to fill the gaps. And I think, operators, they try their best, and some of the largest companies that have the financial backing, they really want to do this in a way that is sustainable, and they really care, and they're trying. It's these small mom and pop operators that end up in a situation to where they just run out of finances. Maybe there's their historic wells where we see this a lot, but I'm really hopeful that as bonding increases, as the market works it out, we're going to see this continue to get better and better. There was the blowout well, which happened in West Texas, and one of the things that I was glad to see when that happened was there was an almost immediate, we will just take care of it, no questions asked, we don't need to figure out who owns it, this is just the right thing to do. And again, there are good and bad in every industry, but supporting those good people, and if we know who the bad ones are as landowners, we don't have to lease to the companies who we know are causing these issues. So I think that's a big part of it, and just doing everything we can, and especially supporting organizations like the Well Done organization, and allowing that to be something that can be other organizations that come up and they can fundraise from us as mineral owners. We all save for taxes, but I can personally say I certainly haven't saved to make a donation to the Well Done Foundation, which I should, and I will.
The other side of that too is legislation. So if you're, to your point where you're not, if you have the opportunity to negotiate a new oil and gas lease or a new surface use agreement, you can codify those requirements into those contracts. But absent that, you're dependent on legislation to hold those operators accountable. Mm-hmm. And I think if you advocate for certain legislation, whether that's something that, working with the Texas NARO chapter, for example, the legislative group with the Atlanta Straub is leading there, and making your voice heard and letting them know what your issues are. Maybe there is a piece of legislation that could be drafted that would help all other royalty owners in Texas to hold those operators accountable, because there are good operators and there are bad operators. Like, that's the fact of things. And most of the time, the larger companies are good because they have so much exposure. They have, that reputation that if they do something in one area, that's going to affect their entire operation and their license to operate. Whereas the smaller operators try to skirt the edge potentially if they're get away with it. So that's, I think we oftentimes don't have control over who buys and sells the lease, but if you can put those terms in writing, then that'll help protect you. And then holding those operators accountable to those terms and then to legislation. But I will say, it's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture a lot of times when it comes to energy, because you see the bad actors and you see the spills and the blowouts on the saltwater on the orphan wells and things like that. It is also, thankfully, generally an isolated issue. Most operators in the United States, I would say, are leading the way from an environmental perspective compared to when you look at it globally, and overall energy mix and things like that we're doing, producing relatively clean oil and gas that can be used to increase the standard of life of people globally, because there are 2 billion people around the world that don't have access to electricity and energy in general. They're burning wood and animal dung to heat their homes and to cook, and they're dying from like lung issues and things like that. So that's, when you think about it globally, providing that kind of energy and doing it in a responsible manner like we generally do in the United States. We can do better always, around those things. And I think it's just working to, let your voice be heard with the Railroad Commission, hearings and legislative, writing your state senators and stuff like that to make sure that they know you're concerned about this issue and that you want to see improvement. And, I think if we just are collectively doing that, that voice gets louder and louder, and they'll do something about it. And they, if it's just, so I think that's important.
Yeah, and to add a bit more to that, there's a wonderful book called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. And if you've not read that book, it's a really wonderful book. It's an easy read, and it really paints that picture. It talks about energy poverty and what are the other options. What would it be like if we didn't? The other thing to think about, i.e., we've all heard this story. Oh, this other heir, they sold it all and they got the cash and they went to the casino. And oh my gosh, why would they do that? Well, there are other options. Educating your kids or the next generation on 1031 exchanges, and that these can be used to go into rental properties, or whether it's residential. There are other options. And so if their moral compass says no, helping them to understand that, maybe you don't have to take the cash and run, but maybe you could use a 1031 to build this wealth in a different way for the other generations to come.
Great. Well, I think that's all the questions we have. We're out of time here. We have to make room for our next speaker here, but thank you so much for your flexibility today. It was fun to answer your questions and to put us on the spot. So thanks again for those of you that are here in person at the NARO National Convention. And if you are listening to this and wonder what NARO is all about, definitely check it out at naro-us.org. It's an amazing organization. And we're here learning a lot in Oklahoma City this week from amazing speakers, and look forward to the rest of the schedule here. So thanks again for listening to the show, and we'll get you in the next episode. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Matt. And thank you, Kimberly.
Yeah, thanks, Kimberly.
Thanks so much for listening to the Mineral Rights Podcast with your host, Matt Sands. Don't forget to subscribe and share at mineralrightspodcast.com. The Mineral Rights Podcast should not be construed as investment, legal, or tax advice. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy.